Hello, it's nice to meet you again today. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. No matter where you are or what you're doing, let this voice accompany you, like a confidant in the quiet moments of the night. If you love these stories, don't forget to support the channel, share to spread emotions, and register channel so we can meet more in the next stories. Now, take a deep breath, relax your mind, and let's enter a world full of mystery, a strange story, where space becomes hazy and darkness seems to swallow everything, where inexplicable sounds keep echoing in your head. Dark Night and My Own Darkness. I'm Michael, and I was once a normal person, just like you. I live a peaceful life, working in a technology company, where work pressure always weighs on me. As each day passed, I sought comfort in my night runs. Empty streets and dim streetlights are places where I can temporarily forget the stress of work. But one night in October, everything changed. After a long day at work, I decided to run through Oak Ridge Drive, as usual. Night had fallen, and this street became strangely quiet. Light winds blew, rustling the withered leaves, but what made me feel different was the cold air, as if something was lurking in the darkness. Starting from that day, I felt an inexplicable change. As I ran through Westfield Park, I started hearing a strange sound from my headphones. At first, I thought it was just interference, but then, I realized it was a voice, a very clear voice, not too loud but as if it was right next to me. Michael. My name rang out in the quiet space, and even though I was running, I couldn't escape that feeling. I turned around and looked around, but there was no one. There was only darkness, and a strange feeling I couldn't describe. At that time, I convinced myself that it was just fatigue, an illusion caused by stress. But that voice didn't stop. Every time I run, I hear it. It's not big, but there's always a strange urge that makes me unable to stop. That voice seemed to know everything about me, about what I thought, what I did. It's like a part of myself. Every night, I passed by that park, where I started to feel something following me. Dim street lights are like lights leading the way into another world. I can't explain this feeling, but something seems wrong. Dark shadows moved through the trees, unidentifiable noises were leaking from somewhere in the darkness. I always feel like someone is looking at me. One night, as I was running through the community center, suddenly the music in my headphones stopped. I took off the headset, checked the connection, but nothing unusual. And then, I heard that voice again, this time, not a whisper, but a clear, soft word that rang out in the quiet space. Michael. I watched you run. Those words, cold and clear, sent chills down my spine. I looked around, but there was no one. I felt like I couldn't stop, as if an invisible force was forcing me to continue. One night, as I walked through the park, I saw a figure standing silently in the middle of the road. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest. That figure stood there, but there was something strange. I couldn't recognize who he was. But his appearance resembles me. Strangely similar to me. Who are you? I asked, my voice choked. I stepped closer, and when the streetlight illuminated his face, I realized that it was me. Not me, but another version of me, one with empty eyes, devoid of emotions. Michael, don't you recognize me? That voice rang out, this time from the same person. I staggered back, unable to believe my eyes. This figure is mine, but it's not me. Those empty eyes, reflecting light like bottomless mirrors, made me feel like I was facing another self, a part one had never known. After that night, I no longer dared to run at night. But the strange things don't stop. I received messages from my own phone number, updates on running times, routes I had never been on, and even information about me that I had not shared with anyone. I tried to explain that it was all just paranoia, a reaction from the brain when under too much stress. But I cannot explain what I saw. The traces, the messages from myself, all made me even more confused. That night, I drove home, tired and exhausted. As I turned onto the familiar road, headlights illuminated a figure standing quietly on the side of the road. A man, wearing a black coat, stood silently, facing the street as if waiting for someone. But the headlights hit his face and I realized, his face had no eyes. Everything around me became blurry, and part of me understood that I couldn't run away anymore. This darkness will never let me go. So, can I escape myself? When I turned around, there was only darkness. And that question still haunts me: who among us is truly ourselves? And who will remain in the dark? After meeting a figure similar to me, I couldn't control the feeling of insecurity in my heart. I tried to continue my normal life, but strange signs appeared again. Every time I walk into my room, I feel like someone is standing behind me, even though I'm the only one there. Shivers ran down my spine every time I turned to look in the mirror, and every time, I saw my eyes looking back at me, but they weren't my eyes. Those eyes were cold, empty, as if there was no emotion in them. Every night, as I fell asleep, I felt a strange presence in the darkness. A feeling like someone was quietly observing me, an invisible threat that I couldn't explain. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I heard a strange noise coming from inside the house. It was a whisper, a soft voice calling my name from a faraway place, from outside the room. I stood up. The weak light from the desk lamp made me feel like I was entering another space, not the one I was living in. I walked out into the hallway, feeling a cold run through my body. Everything around me felt like it was changing, like there was an invisible force manipulating everything. Footsteps in the house echoed from hidden corners, even though I knew for sure that I was alone. One rainy night, I decided I couldn't live in this confusion any longer. I had to find out the truth about what was happening. I went back to the park where I met my doppelganger, but this time, I didn't simply run through it. I entered the park, where darkness seemed to swallow everything. The feeling of loneliness and fear was overwhelming. There was no sound except my footsteps and rapid breathing. The strangest thing was, when I walked through the path leading into the park, I felt like I was returning to a familiar place, but a place I couldn't remember. Everything in the park seems to have changed, unlike before. The winding road seemed to lead me into a maze with no way out. The thick darkness and surrounding silence made me feel like I was in another world, a world where the rules of reality no longer applied. As I entered deeper into the park, I saw a figure waiting ahead. A man, tall and slender, stood silently, not moving. The dim light of the streetlight shined on him, and I realized he was not a stranger. He is me, another version of me, with identical features. But this time, it wasn't the empty eyes I saw in the figure before. This time, his eyes were full of coldness, as if seeing everything and without any emotion. "Michael," his voice said, not from my mouth, but from inside my head, as if I were the one talking to myself. He smiled, but that smile was not mine. It's like a mask, hiding the dark truth. I couldn't move, my body felt frozen, even though my heart was beating wildly in my chest. I couldn't take my eyes off him, and in those brief moments, I realized that I wasn't me anymore. I lost a part of myself a long time ago, and now, that shadow is returning, reclaiming what was lost. "Michael, don't you realize?" he said, his voice deep and strange, but with a familiar ring to it. I stepped back, trying to say something, but my words were stuck in my throat. A feeling of dread engulfed me, and part of me understood that I was facing something I had always tried to avoid. "He is the dark part of me, the part one have long denied." "You can't run away," he whispered. "Run to where? What can you change? I am you. And you will never escape me." Those words hit me like a powerful blow, leaving me unable to think. I ran, not because I wanted to, but because my body couldn't stop. But when I ran, he was still there, always following me. I can't escape the darkness, I can't escape myself. My steps became more and more hurried, but each step seemed to pull me back. I ran through familiar streets, but they all became blurred and unfamiliar. The street lights began to flicker, and I knew that I was slowly losing control. I don't know where I am anymore. When I turned around, I saw him standing there, almost no longer human. His eyes, those cold eyes, reflected everything I had done, everything I had overlooked. A voice rang out in my head, this time not a question, but a statement. You let me into your life, and now you must pay the price. When I ran out of the park, I didn't feel like myself anymore. It feels like I'm living in a parallel world where the rules of reality no longer exist. I returned home, but the atmosphere in the room now seemed to have changed. Everything around me became blurred, as if they no longer existed in the same space as me. And then, I realized something. I couldn't escape my own shadow. Every night, I hear those footsteps again, I hear that voice again. I don't know if I can live in this world anymore. But there's one thing I'm sure of, that darkness will never let me go. This story ends, but perhaps, for me, it has only just begun. And when you look in the mirror, you may see yourself, but do you see something else inside your eyes? I can't describe the feeling when I walked through my door. Everything in this space, every surrounding object, feels different. I no longer recognize myself. That feeling, when you return to a seemingly familiar place, but feel like you're in a parallel world, where everything is strange. I looked around, and everything seemed to be covered by a hazy film. The painting on the wall, the sofa I often sit on, even the clock on the table, all seemed to expand, swell, and then shrink again as if they didn't really exist in the same space as me. I walked towards the mirror in the living room. It was an antique mirror, its face shiny, reflecting my image. But the strange thing is, when I look there, I don't just see me anymore. Another figure stood behind me in the mirror, but it wasn't a stranger. That's me, but something is different. Someone I didn't recognize at all. My eyes in the mirror are no longer my eyes. They are bright, defiant, and devoid of any emotion. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. My lungs feel congested. I looked in the mirror and saw a smirk appear on my face in there, not my smile, but another version, one I didn't recognize. Michael, I've been here the whole time, the voice said in my head, like a terrible whisper that I couldn't escape. This voice is not my voice. It's not for normal people. It was a voice from the darkness, a voice that I could not ignore. I can't stand still anymore. Part of me said I had to run, I had to get away from it all. But I can't. Every direction I went felt blocked, as if I were entering an invisible maze. Everything around me began to deform, the walls wobbled, the ceiling lowered as if trying to squeeze me into a small, cramped space. My eyes closed in despair, trying to convince myself that this was just an illusion. But when I opened my eyes, I was no longer in my house. The room has disappeared. I stand somewhere else. A dark space, no light, no landmarks to identify. There was only endless darkness covering everything, a space like an invisible passage. I don't understand where I am anymore. All around me is just endless emptiness. And then I realized, I wasn't in a room or a house anymore. I had entered another world, a space separate from reality, where I no longer had control over everything. You can't escape me, the voice said again, this time not in my head, but from everywhere, as if this very space were speaking. I am you. I have always been here. Suddenly, out of the darkness appeared a shape. That's me. Exactly like me, but different. I saw myself coming out of the darkness, my face cold, my eyes empty. That's me, but it's not me. I realized that I was facing the darkness deep within my soul. I'm your friend, I heard myself say, but my voice wasn't mine. That voice was dry and cold. And I've been waiting for you. Waiting until you face me. I started to understand. I wasn't just facing a doppelganger. I am facing the dark parts of my mind. Fears, uncontrollable emotions, all locked up in this darkness. And now, they have returned, reclaiming their freedom. My steps stopped. I stood there, facing myself. Darkness is not just invisible silhouettes. It's the parts of me that I've been trying to deny all this time. The fears, the unresolved anger, all were waiting for me in this darkness. Why run away? The voice asked, but this time, it wasn't a challenging question. It's like a call, an invitation. I am you. You can't run forever. I can't stop anymore. That shadow cannot defeat me. I had no choice but to face what I feared the most. I walked towards my shadow, feeling the cold air surrounding me. Every step I took seemed to pull me into another world, where I no longer had control over everything. You can't win, the shadow's voice kept saying. I am the part you always wanted to avoid. I don't say anything more. I just walked forward, into the darkness. When I touched that shadow, a cold, heavy feeling filled my body. I can't breathe. Everything around me seemed to crumble, then disappear into an endless space. And then, I realized, I wasn't just fighting a part of me. I'm fighting the emotions, the dark parts of my soul that I tried to hide. Once I face it, I will understand that the shadow is not an enemy. It is a part of me, and only when I accept it can I be free. I opened my eyes, and I was back in reality. But there's a strange thing, I no longer feel like I'm being watched. I no longer feel worried or afraid. Everything around me has returned to normal. But I know that, even so, that shadow is still somewhere inside me. And I will never be able to escape it. When I entered the room, a strange cold feeling enveloped me. The books stacked neatly on the wall now formed a strange spiral on the floor, an arrangement I couldn't explain. Every step I took made this space even more bizarre, as if my every move was being watched from somewhere hidden. Faint light came from the small table lamp in the room, but as I got closer, I noticed something strange. No one was in the room. There were no signs of a break-in. But the inexplicable feeling was still there, like an invisible presence was watching me from the darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone in this house. I walked into the middle of the room, looking down at the books scattered on the floor, my hands shaking as I bent down to pick them up. And then, for a brief moment, I suddenly realized something strange. Even though I've never organized books this way, even though I'm sure I haven't, those books have an intentional arrangement. Some message? A joke from the dark? A way for me to feel that something still exists in this house, even when I can't see it? Cold sweat began to flow down my spine. I stood there, motionless, only hearing my breathing echo in the quiet room. My eyes stopped on the mirror facing me, where my reflection was reflected, but something was wrong. That feeling, the feeling I had been avoiding all this time, suddenly flared up. I no longer feel safe here. Tonight, I know that I am not alone. Not in the way I think, not in what I feel. The shadow is still following me. Not just in the dark corners of this house but also in my own mind. While standing facing the mirror, I suddenly realized that there was something unusual about my reflection. My eyes, just like before, something was wrong. They seemed to be changing. Not my eyes anymore. They became dark, deep, filled with fear, and then I realized something I had never thought of. That shadow, the shadow I saw in the mirror, was not just my reflection. It was a part of me, a dark part that I tried to keep hidden. And now, it is no longer an invisible ghost. It is standing facing me in this very mirror. Suddenly, I turned around and looked around the room, fearing that I would once again see my shadow somewhere, but no. Only darkness covers everything. Suddenly, a noise rang out, breaking the dead silence in the house. Footstep. Those footsteps didn't come from anyone but me. It didn't come from behind me, but from somewhere far away, from invisible spaces in this space. My eyes opened wide, searching around, my heart beating wildly. My body was stiff, unable to move. My hands began to tremble, and a bone-chilling feeling enveloped my entire body. I turned around, filled with fear, and I knew I couldn't get out anymore. Not because I didn't try, but because everything seemed to be arranged. That shadow has caught up with me, not only in this space but also in my own life. It was waiting for me to face the truth I had been trying to avoid. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the room changed. Everything became strangely quiet, as if I was living in a different space. And then I saw him. That figure, standing silently, as if waiting for me, was just a few steps away from me. No noise. There is no movement. There was just that presence, a ghost of myself. "Michael," the voice said, but not from his mouth. It came from somewhere deep inside me, from my own mind, a reminder that I couldn't hide anymore. Suddenly, I understood. I cannot escape that darkness. It has existed in me, for a long time. It was I who invited it in, it was I who created it. What I saw were not ghosts or hallucinations. That's me. A dark part of me that I denied. My steps staggered, and I knew I couldn't keep running anymore. Faded memories slowly appeared in my mind, memories that I had tried to bury. I understand that I must face them, accept them, otherwise I will forever be caught in that darkness. When I faced the darkness within me, nothing changed. The room was still silent, the house was still as quiet as ever, but I felt like there was a change in the air. Not a liberation, but an acceptance. I understand that darkness will always be within me, but I don't need to fear it anymore. The night continued to drag on. Every step I took seemed to slow down, and I understood that the darkness, the fear I had been running from, had become an indispensable part of my life. So, when you face your darkness, will you run away, or will you face it? The answer is not clear, but I know that no one can avoid it forever. I couldn't escape the feeling of unease growing inside me, even as I tried to find reasonable explanations for the strange phenomena that had occurred. Every day, that ambiguity becomes clearer, and I realize that I cannot continue to ignore what has been happening. That shadow, the shadow I tried to deny, followed me like a shadow that would never leave. All the little changes in the house, objects being moved, unexplained sounds, are just signs that something is wrong. One afternoon, while I was working in the office, I suddenly noticed the light in the room flickering. At first, I thought it might be an electrical problem, but after checking the control panel, everything was normal. A cold feeling prevailed as I entered the hallway, where the flickering light created strange patterns. I couldn't help but connect this with the previous bizarre events. It wasn't an electrical problem, but a sign of something trying to get my attention. As I approached the light source, the beats in my head became stronger, and I began to feel the tension increase. The flashes of light are not random, they have a purpose. I could almost feel a presence behind me, something quietly watching. It felt like there was someone standing right behind me, but when I turned around, there was nothing but empty space. Every night, I wake up in the middle of the night, in the quiet silence of the house. Whenever I turn around and look in the mirror, I no longer see myself. Each reflection seems to be changing. My eyes, as if influenced by an invisible force, became increasingly darker. I couldn't recognize myself anymore, and I didn't know if this was real or just a haunting from the strange things happening around me. Occasionally, I hear breathing, from no one other than myself, but the sound is not mine. I felt like there was someone standing outside my bedroom door, standing quietly, patiently, just waiting for me. The gentle scratching sounds came from the drywall again, and I knew I wasn't crazy. I could hear those sounds, clear and undeniable. Every time I looked at the clock, it was exactly 3:18 a.m. Why 3:18? Is it a coincidence, or is there some meaning that I don't understand? This feeling of insecurity gradually covered my entire body. I couldn't sleep, couldn't rest, and each night it got worse. Finally, I decided to return to my home after sleepless nights. I know I can't live in fear forever, but I feel like I can't leave this house. Anyway, I've bet everything on this place, there's no other way but to continue facing what's happening. It's time for me to face it. When I opened the door, a strange feeling enveloped me. The house has changed. Not physically, but the feeling it gives. The feeling of a space has been changed, no longer the place I knew. The lighting in the living room remained the same, but I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. I carefully walked across the room, feeling every step I took on the wooden floor. The feeling of shadows, invisible tracks, seemed to be approaching me from all sides. Sometimes I feel like someone is watching, but when I turn around, I don't see anyone. Yet again, when I looked in the bathroom mirror, I noticed something strange. My eyes, again my eyes, but something different. A cold look, as if someone was looking from inside me, but it wasn't me. One night, I woke up at 3:18 a.m., again. This time, I decided not to just sit and watch anymore. I must find out the truth. I know that if I continue to live in this fear, I will not be able to overcome it. With anxiety, I took the flashlight and decided to face the shadow that had been following me all this time. I walked into the hallway, each heavy step echoing in the quiet space. And then, I heard a scratching sound, like fingers tapping on the wall. When I opened the bedroom door, there was nothing but darkness, but I felt that presence. A coldness invaded my body, and I knew, inevitably, I had to face this. Thick darkness, nothing but darkness. But I still feel, someone is standing near me. I turned around and faced myself, not in the mirror, but right in this space. My eyes, now, are not mine anymore. I don't know what I did to deserve being followed, bothered by an incomprehensible force. Long sleepless nights, stressful moments, and phone calls at unexplainable hours made me no longer recognize myself. At first, I thought I was just too stressed, that it was hallucinations or technical problems. But now, I'm starting to understand that it was a real presence. Even though I changed my phone number, changed my email address, and even moved to a new apartment, I still couldn't escape this pursuit. Every night, at exactly 3:17 a.m., I feel that presence. It didn't harm me, at least not physically, but it constantly tested me, forcing me to live in anxiety and doubt. I went to tech experts and asked them to check my device. They said there was no sign of malware, no outside interference. But I know this cannot be explained. What I feel, what I experience, is something that cannot be explained by any technology. It seemed like all my electronic devices were mysteriously affected. Sometimes it's just a small change, a digital clock shows the wrong time, a TV loses signal for a moment, or a car alarm sounds unusually. But sometimes, things become clearer. Strange, one-word messages sent from unfamiliar phone numbers. And of course, it's always exactly at 3:17 a.m. I stopped trying to explain to others what I was going through. No one understands, and if they knew, they would think I was crazy. Long nights, lazy mornings, I can only face this truth myself. Whenever I try to fight it, it only makes it worse. I began to sense something bigger was happening, an inevitable change in my life. It's not just the odd phone call or text message anymore. Now, I feel like something is moving in the space around me. Not a ghost, but a real, palpable presence. Sometimes, I could feel its breath almost right behind me, but when I turned around, there was no one. This makes me confused. If this is a trick of the mind, why did it take so long? If this was a technical error, why did everything happen at a certain time, at 3:17 a.m.? And why me? All these questions remain unanswered. I was starting to realize that I couldn't hide anymore. The signs were becoming clearer, and I couldn't keep pretending that everything was going to be okay. I may not be able to change what's happening, but I can't keep living in fear. This isn't about a phone call or a strange text anymore. This is about a presence that I cannot avoid. I can't explain it, but I can feel something deep in my heart. Some connection, a connection to something far beyond the physical world I knew. And every night, at 3:17 a.m., that presence came closer, as if waiting for me to acknowledge something important. It wasn't trying to hurt me, but something strange was trying to communicate with me in a way I couldn't understand. Tonight, I decided I would no longer run away. I will face this presence, not by trying to fight it, but by finding out what it wants from me. I don't know if I will ever get an answer, but I know that I cannot continue to live in this fear forever. I went back to the living room, plugged my phone into the charger, and set it down on the table. Tonight, I won't let it bother me anymore. I don't know what awaits me, but I will not let myself be controlled by fear. And when the clock struck 3:17 a.m., I braced myself to face that presence. I am no longer afraid. I don't know what it is, but I know that I have to face it, to find out the truth. And, maybe, that's the only way I can end this cycle. So, when that darkness approaches, I will not back down. I can't say I'm surprised anymore. As I stood face to face with the shadow in the glass, I realized that it was not something supernatural, not a ghost or a trapped soul. It is an alternative. A reflection not of me, but of something else, something I couldn't control, something that lived inside me without me ever realizing it. The eyes in my reflection were empty, the smile stretched too far, the face unnaturally hunched. This is not me, but it is me. The feeling of not being able to escape overwhelmed me. My fingers trembled as I looked at that figure, feeling the cold seep into every fiber of my body. I couldn't take my eyes off it, even though I knew that with each passing second, I felt myself losing more and more control. This cannot be just imagination. The eyes in the mirror weren't mine, but they were me, and I felt a change in the air around me. That glass doesn't lie, but it never tells the whole truth. It only reflects what I want to see, but not what I need to face. Part of me has known that for a long time, but I still can't stand it. I was living in an illusion that could no longer be avoided. That shadow, my strange double, is not an entity outside of me, but the dark part of my soul. That was the confusion and fear that I had tried to hide for so long. You can't close the door anymore. That sentence echoed in my head, and now I understand. The door opened a long time ago, and I can't go back anymore. I can't keep avoiding this. Everything has led me here, to this moment, facing myself. Every night, I see that shadow more clearly. It was no longer a vague reflection. It became more real, more intimate, and I couldn't understand why I felt this way. Every evening I reset everything, trying to protect myself from it, but I can't. It comes at me from every angle. From the glass door, from the TV screen, from the shadows in the corner of the room. That shadow wasn't just following me. It is slowly replacing me, from within me. I began to feel that it was not an appendage, but a part of my nature, a part that I had not recognized before. And now, it can't be hidden anymore. I stopped, I couldn't turn back anymore. The glass in front of me is more than just a window reflecting an image. It is a threshold, an entrance. I didn't just look at the reflection but also at myself. And I realized that that shadow had existed for a long time, but I only saw it now. It is no longer something far away, not a haunted story or a trick of my mind. It's the truth, and I can't escape it. That shadow, that face, those hollow eyes is me. I ran away, but now I know that I can't run forever. There's no place I can hide, no door I can close. I didn't come back anymore. That shadow is not something outside of me. It is not an entity that wants to harm me. It is the dark part of me, the part that I have ignored, the part that I dare not face. And now, it has come, forcing me to realize that I cannot escape myself. Tonight, when the clock struck 3:17 a.m., I was no longer afraid. I knew that presence was not a threat. It's just a part of me, a part I've been denying all this time. And now I understand, there's nothing to be afraid of. There is only acceptance and facing the dark parts of ourselves. The door cannot be closed anymore. And I don't have to run away anymore. Every night I feel like I'm getting closer to the truth, but it's never enough to understand what's going on. Strange phenomena, footsteps, and ghostly images continued to follow me as a warning that could not be ignored. I no longer wonder, what is it, which began to doubt whether I could leave this spiral. A part of me, the rational part, always seeks to explain things rationally, to find reasons for the inexplicable. But the more I tried to explain, the deeper I went into the darkness I was running from. When I met with the property manager today about the move, she brought me an old architectural drawing of the building. On it, I noticed a very strange detail. The floors of the building are not numbered in the usual way. The 13th floor was absent, and in its place was the 7th floor, a floor that did not exist in my memory, a place I had lived in for so many years without ever knowing of its existence. When I asked her to explain this drawing, she simply said, "It is a special arrangement, part of a structure designed according to some form of superstition." But I know, the more I learn, the more I feel it's not okay. It seemed like there was something very wrong in the way this building was built, in the silence of the walls, in the darkness of the floors. Everything I once thought was normal now seemed like unanswered questions. On Friday night, when I got back from a late meeting, I decided to try again. This time, I will deal with the strangeness of the 7th floor. I entered the elevator and pressed the button for the 9th floor, as always. But this time, when the elevator stopped, I was not surprised when the door opened not to the 9th floor, but to the 7th floor. It stood there, silent and dark. My hand tightened on the close button, but the door did not close. A strange pressure enveloped me. A cold feeling surrounded me as I looked into that dark hallway. I could hear footsteps, a strange echoing sound as if the space here was much larger than it appeared. There were no lights on, just the pale red light from the emergency exit sign in the distance. I pressed the close button again, but the door still wouldn't close. The sound of footsteps got closer and closer, each step getting closer. Suddenly, I felt a cold breath on my neck. It felt like someone was standing right behind me. When I turned around, no one was there. The door was still open, leading me into a pitch-black space. I cannot describe the feeling of confusion at that time. Strangely enough, when I looked into the hallway, I noticed the doors were unlike any other in this building. The 7th floor doesn't exist, but now I stand here, looking at a hallway that can't possibly be real. With my mind confused and my heart pounding in my chest, I decided I couldn't stand still any longer. I hurried back to the elevator, pressed the close button and looked forward to the safety of the 9th floor. As the elevator moved up, I thought of that darkness again. How can we explain the appearance of the 7th floor? How could I explain the existence of that strange corridor that I had never seen before? I returned to my apartment in a panic, not daring to look back. Part of me knew that something dark was waiting for me somewhere in the hallways of this building. I can't explain it, but I know one thing, I can't hide forever. That shadow was not an intrusion from the outside, but a part of me, a part that I never wanted to face. The next morning, I decided to leave this place. I can't continue to live in this fear, I can't continue to run away from this shadow that I don't understand. But I know one thing, no matter where I go, no matter what I do, that shadow will still be there, inside me, waiting for me to turn around and face it. Day by day, I am no longer myself. The appearance of strange messages on the notice board in my apartment, along with inexplicable scratching sounds, disturbed my mind. I started researching the house's history, but what I found only made things even scarier. This building's history stretches back to 1897, and old records show that the previous owner, a woman, experienced strange events. She used to feel like she was being watched, and even saw a shadow in her room. A scary story about a man imprisoned in this room who caused strange phenomena when the house was built. It seemed like he was under the influence of something, maybe some kind of hysteria, and in the end, he died in this room. But not only that, the files also told of another event that she had never dared to mention. They were in the walls, she said, and this made me feel uneasy. She used to hear scratching in the walls, just like I do now. That day, when I came home after an afternoon of work, I was filled with anxiety. I opened the door and went straight into the office, like always. But when I approached the notice board, I saw a new note. This time, the writing was not mine, but someone else's, someone invisible. The message was like a warning. I tried to warn you, they keep me here as they will keep you. They want what's inside you, and they will make you write things you don't want. I felt a cold run down my spine as I read those words. They make it impossible for me to breathe. I heard the scratching sound again, this time from inside the wall, right behind the bulletin board. I felt fear weighing me down, but my curiosity was stronger. I couldn't wait anymore. I needed to face what was hiding behind those walls. The scratching sound became stronger, as if something was trying to escape from there. Having no other choice, I took the video camera and set it to record everything in the office, especially the bulletin board. The camera will send me notifications if any movement occurs. I locked the door and prepared for a long night. When I returned, I discovered something strange. Even though the cameras had been recording all night, nothing had happened. All the footage showed was an empty room, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching me from within the walls. The next day, I decided to seek help from a professional. I met an old friend, a former police officer who now works in a private office. He said that these phenomena could be related to something supernatural, but I couldn't accept that. Together with him, I tried looking for evidence of strange events occurring in this area, but there was nothing concrete. Everything feels fuzzy, as if it's all just a game of the mind. After a sleepless night, I couldn't find any logical reason to explain what was happening. I was starting to panic, feeling like I was about to fall into a spiral that I couldn't escape from. By the next morning, I realized something. I couldn't continue living like this. I cannot live in this house, cannot live in the fear it brings. I decided to leave, but I knew that no matter where I went, something would follow me. At 3:17 a.m., I woke up again, like every night before. But this time, there was no scratching sound, no message, no shadow watching me. All that remained was silence, a terrifying silence. I looked at the clock on the wall, and as the faint light from the night shone in, I saw something familiar, a darkness, unrecognizable, but it was there. Everything around me became blurry, and I felt myself drifting into a world I no longer had control over. That shadow, something that was waiting for me, was very close. I can feel its presence in the air. Every night, it comes closer. And I know I can't run away anymore. The tenuous sense of stillness in the apartment was broken, not by shrill sounds or gruesome sights, but by a strange presence in the air. This time, there were no more footsteps or scratching sounds. No, the only sound was a gentle whisper, passing like a breeze, but it was enough to numb all my senses. This feeling is unlike anything I have ever experienced. I stood there, facing the cold void, knowing that someone, or something, was waiting for me. And I know, if I go back, I will face something inexplicable, a truth I'm not sure I can face. Reality around me seemed to be shrinking. Every breath I took brought with it a faint feeling, as if the air was being squeezed out. Everything seemed so still, so perfect in its dead silence. It's just me and this space, there's no way out. This is my home, I said, my voice firm, though each word sounded more like a statement of fear than an assertion of ownership. I'm not talking to anyone but myself, I know that. But I kept going. You don't belong here. The space around me was silent, seemingly responding to my words with a terrifying silence. The heavy feeling in the air suddenly turned to a kind of deafening silence, making my ears feel like they were about to explode. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, just stood still and waited. Right at that moment, a cold wind blew past me, without any reason, without any movement around me. That feeling made me think about the stories I've heard of people who survived facing death, or people who encountered other existences, things that should never have existed. Every word I said seemed to evoke something in the darkness, something invisible but very close. I don't know how long I stood there, but suddenly everything came back, as quickly as they had disappeared. The original sounds of presence returned, again, like footsteps coming from somewhere in space, a movement without origin. I was ready to turn back, to face what I couldn't explain, but everything was so blurry. The darkness is not only behind me, but also within me. And then, in a moment of complete silence, when I no longer knew what I was doing, a whisper rang out. Not in my ears, but in my mind. It was not a clear word, but a vague, incomprehensible message, as if transmitted through invisible waves in space. Run, that whisper, though soft, yet powerful, was the clearest statement I had heard during this strange time. Run. I have to run. But my feet felt tied to the ground. That shadow, although its shape was unclear, still came closer. There's no need to rush it, because I can't escape. I felt like the space around me was shrinking, as if I was no longer standing in a normal room but was being swallowed into an invisible void. Then suddenly, it all disappeared. I jumped up, my heart beating rapidly. The room was dark, with only faint light shining through the window curtains. It took me a moment to realize where I was. The nightmare just now, or was it more than just a dream? I looked around. The walls are old, the ceilings are high and the air is chillingly cold. I felt like something still lingered in this space, an invisible presence, as if I hadn't really woken up but had just fallen into another layer of reality. The feeling of being watched appeared again. Someone is looking at me. But in that moment, I understood. Room 307 is not a physical room. It was a part of me, a place I had overlooked, and now it wouldn't let me leave until I accepted everything. The darkness that I had been running from for so long was now waiting for me to face. And I know that when I face it, I will find the peace I have been searching for. This room is waiting for me, penetrating every scene and every move of mine. Even though there was nothing concrete to see, the feeling of suffocation, heaviness, and doubt was always present in the air. The first night in room 307, after a long day of traveling and getting used to the new space, I couldn't sleep. I lay there, eyes wide open, unable to shake the feeling that someone was looking at me, though I couldn't pinpoint who. The light of the street lamp weakly filtered through the curtains, creating unusually long shadows on the floor. I tried to rationalize everything, telling myself that this was just the effect of the light and the feeling of stress I felt after a long day. But small, unclear sounds kept echoing in the room. Gentle rubbing sounds, soft noises like something moving in the dark. I tried to ignore them, but they kept haunting me, constantly keeping me awake. The atmosphere in the room felt like there was a presence. Even though there's no one here, I can feel something. Something very close, as if this space was breathing with me. I feel cold, and sometimes, when I close my eyes, I feel like I'm not alone anymore. This feeling increases strongly every night. The sounds seemed non-existent, but they kept me from sleeping. And then, on the quietest nights, I heard those sounds again. Every sound is a reminder, a sign that something is wrong. Those shadows seemed to be watching me, waiting for me to do something, though I couldn't guess what it was. I tried to hide, I tried to run away from this feeling by changing rooms, even changing places. But no matter where I am, that feeling always sticks with me. Like a part of my life, a part of a space I can't escape. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't change the fact that, on some level, I was trapped in something I couldn't explain. Perhaps it is some kind of invisible bond, something that binds me to these spaces, to these sounds, to these memories. It has become a part of me, an inseparable part no matter how hard I try. And now, I no longer ask if I can run away from it. It's about how to live with it without being completely dominated by it. The meaning is haunting, like a sheet covering the entire space, leaving only the sound of the wind gently blowing through the cracks of the cabin. It seemed that all sounds, all life in the forest, had strangely disappeared, as if this space was absorbing everything, not allowing any trace to remain. I sat quietly, pen and notebook still in hand, but the shock of the changes taking place around me made it impossible for me to continue taking notes. The window covered with my backpack and makeshift tools was no longer an effective shield. I looked out through the small gap, where the shadows of the trees became increasingly strange, bending like unknown shapes. They reached out, the branches seemed to stretch deliberately, as if wanting to reach me. Every time the wind blew, I felt not only that the air was changing but that there was a presence watching me, listening to my breathing sounds. I just closed my eyes to rest a bit, but I can't. This feeling, something approaching, inexplicable, made me face real fear. That feeling grows stronger in the moments between sleep and awakening, where consciousness is most fragile and easily influenced. When the silence was broken, it was not by the sound of the wind or the animals in the forest but by an unforgettable knock, like a call, not from a person, but from something unrecognizable. I stood up, my limbs were cold, inexplicable fear slowly seeping into my body. I didn't dare look back, because I knew that when I did, would see what I didn't want to see, an inexplicable entity, standing in the darkness, just waiting for me to face it. The tapping sounds, like a human heartbeat, kept accelerating, leaving me unable to do anything but record every moment in my mind. Space seems to be shrinking. Somehow, I knew that if I didn't face it, I would be swallowed up in my own fear. And I, once again, sat silently, with only the dim light of the lamp and the feeling of not being able to take my eyes off the dark shadows stretching across the space. Amid the stillness of the night, the sounds from the hallway became inevitable, a reminder of something hidden, waiting. When I looked through the hole in the door, the man's figure was still standing there, not moving, as if he was waiting for me to return. Even though I tried to convince myself that it was all just a coincidence, a strange feeling that I couldn't explain kept following me, making my heart beat stronger, as if there was some connection between us that I couldn't clearly perceive. The next day, when daylight illuminated every corner of the room, I was able to breathe more freely. But it cannot be denied that the feeling of suffocation is still present. My thoughts were entangled together. Strangely they began to repeat unforgettable images of the room, of that man, of what I felt but could not yet explain. The truth, though easily forgotten in the darkness of a long night, becomes elusive when the light begins to shine. I decided to learn more about the Blackwood Hotel, not just for professional or historical research reasons, but because there was something about this space that made me unable to calm down. The hotel's historical records showed changes over time, fluctuations in owners, and major renovations, but part of the story was missing, details I couldn't ignore. And then, as I gradually entered this path of discovery, the feeling of instability suddenly enveloped me. The next night, when I returned to my room, I couldn't help but feel a disturbance in my mind. A strange noise rang out from somewhere behind me, and then, the figure appeared again, unclear but menacing. My hand trembled as I tried to touch the key, as it felt like something was looking at me, watching me from every angle. The weak light of the desk lamp illuminated the dark corners of the room, and I realized an irreversible truth. Something in this hotel has been buried for a long time, and now it cannot continue to be forgotten. I couldn't leave these questions without answers, but also couldn't find a way to safely address them. With a mind full of anxiety and a heart full of insecurity, I decided to face the truth that I cannot escape, cannot explain, but will certainly never leave me alone. This story is both mysterious and tense, combining psychological anxiety and supernatural elements. From strange sounds and unexplained traces in the attic, to mystical rituals and an inevitable encounter with an ancient entity, the story not only fills the reader with fear but also creates a sense of unrelenting tension, as the protagonist gradually realizes that he is caught in an inescapable loop. The transition from doubt and discovery to the clear perception of a connection to an invisible entity is a particularly fascinating subject. This union is not simply a confrontation with evil or the occult, but an inner journey where the narrator must confront the incomprehensible, the inexplicable, and ultimately come to terms with his own shadow, and what he must sacrifice to stop being haunted. The feeling of inescapability and the growing strength of that entity, combined with the sense of familiarity and repetition in dreams, makes the story even more breathtaking and enchanting. Details such as scratches on the attic floor, strange symbols, and the blur of darkness all add to the tension, creating a haunting picture of captivity, both physical and psychological. The main character seems to be pulled into a world from which they cannot escape, where the decisions they make will determine their fate, but are also part of an eternal cycle. This story, full of darkness and promise, not only raises questions about life and death, but also about the decisions and profound values that people can sacrifice for some invisible purpose. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. Even though it's only a short moment, I hope it has brought you a special experience, whether it's scary, curious, or simply a little quiet amidst the chaos of life. If you love stories like this, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel so we can meet more in the next stories. And don't hesitate to leave your comments below, because every word you share is valuable motivation for me to continue telling new stories. Have a good evening, and if there's a night where you feel like someone is quietly watching you, remember, maybe it's just your imagination, or maybe it's not. See you again in the next stories.